Chris Roberts didn't want to just make games, he wanted to make movies you could play. While growing up, he devoured science fiction like Star Wars and Star Trek, and by his teens, he was already coding his own video games on the BBC Micro. At just 17, he released his first commercial title, and in the years that followed, he kept chasing bigger ideas, blending cinematic flair with interactive design. By the late 1980s, Roberts was freelancing for Origin Systems when inspiration struck. He had never written a line of 3D code before, but he locked himself into 14-hour days, teaching himself how to rotate and scale bitmaps until starships came alive on the screen. Poured his ideas into a thick design document called Squadron, outlined a galactic war, a carrier full of wingmen with personalities, and an enemy empire to fight against. It wasn't just a game pitch, it was the blueprint for an interactive movie. That dream became Wing Commander in 1990, a groundbreaking space combat simulator that merged thrilling dogfights with cinematic storytelling. Today, we're taking flight into the story of Chris Roberts' journey to bring it to life, exploring the game's ambitious development, its impact on the industry, and the legacy that still echoes in Star Citizen. So fire up your engines, lock onto your targets, and join us for today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 265th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are blasting off into Wing Commander, the 1990 space combat simulator that brought cinematic storytelling to the gaming world. Known for its intense dogfights and branching narratives, Wing Commander set a new standard for immersive experiences. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably get shot down while arguing with his wingman. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, do you think you're the ace of the fleet, or would your squad leave you behind on the carrier?
I don't think I'd be the ace, but I don't think I'd make it off the carrier either.
No, somewhere in between?
I think I'd be the ace of the carrier. If any, maybe.
The ace of the carrier.
I could be the ace of the carrier.
Okay. I'm the ace of the carrier. That's fair. Okay, so Wing Commander is a series that has been around since the 90s. It extended for a while. You ever tripped on a Wing Commander game?
I have not, no.
Do you know who Chris Roberts is?
No.
Ooh, he's still relevant today, actually. All right, well then we have a story for you. But before we get into said story, why don't you share with our listeners what else happened during the current week in gaming history?
Well, kicking it off on September 26, 1986, Konami released Castlevania for the Famicom Disk System in Japan, and with it, introduced the world to whip-wielding vampire hunter Simon Belmont. This gothic action platformer dared players to storm Dracula's castle, face monsters pulled straight out of old horror films, and somehow keep their cool while dodging Medusa heads over bottomless pits. Behind the punishing difficulty was an elegant blend of timing, precision, and atmosphere that made the whole thing unforgettable. Castlevania wasn't just another action game. It was one of the first to marry arcade thrills with horror storytelling, and its legacy is still alive in every whip crack and candle drop across decades of sequels and spin-offs. We told its full story back in episode 213, so give that one a listen if you'd like to hear more about how this franchise became one of gaming's most enduring names.
Metroidvania.
I don't know what you're talking about, David.
I'm playing a Metroidvania right now.
While we're recording, gosh, who are you?
You.
That's my shtick. Exactly.
exactly. I'm not playing it right. I can't. I would not be able to focus on this podcast while playing that game at all. Not in any way, shape, or form.
You say that like you're focused anyway, Dave.
Facts. All right. Well, next.
On September 21st, 1993, Nintendo tried to follow up the simplest and most addictive puzzle formula ever invented with Tetris 2 on the Famicom. Instead of the traditional line clearing tetrominoes, players had to match colors and detonate flashing bombs. It was like taking your favorite recipe and adding way too many extra spices. Some fans enjoyed the change, but others weren't so convinced. Developed at the height of Tetris Mania, the sequel was an attempt to extend the brand while experimenting with new mechanics. While it never reached the timeless heights of the original, Tetris 2 is still a fascinating footnote in puzzle game history, a reminder that even when you already have lightning in a bottle, there's always someone itching to shake it up.
Someone always thinks they can do it better.
Indeed, and not always can it be done, but hey, sometimes it can. You
It's
never know.
hard. It's hard to improve on perfection.
I
Hence
don't
why I'm
know.
the way I am.
Yeah, okay, Dave, whatever you gotta tell yourself.
Okay.
Next up, on September 23rd, 1994, Looking Glass Technologies changed the shape of PC gaming with System Shock for DOS. Players stepped into the role of a hacker stranded on Citadel Station, only to discover that they had to face down one of gaming's most chilling villains, the rogue AI known as Shodan. With its free look mouse controls, dense environments, and complex inventory system, System Shock blurred the lines between shooter and role playing game, essentially inventing the immersive sim blueprint that later gave us Deus Ex and Bioshock. While it wasn't a commercial success, its influence was massive. Shodan herself remains iconic, a taunting digital ghost that still haunts game history. We dug into the series back in episode 207, so if you want to dive deeper into how this revolutionary game came together, go listen.
Give it a listen. Woo, listen. Listen to all the
In-
episodes.
Indeed.
That's also a great game. That's a great series. We talked about both System Shock and System Shock 2 in that episode, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Next up, on September 25th, 2001, Ico slipped quietly onto the PlayStation 2 in North America and redefined what video games could look like. Directed by Fumito Ueda and created by Team Ico, the game follows a young boy and a mysterious girl as they attempt to escape from a castle. There's not much dialogue, just atmosphere, puzzles, and an emotional bond built through gestures and handholding. It was hauntingly beautiful and deliberately minimalist, standing in stark contrast to the bombastic blockbusters of its time. Though it didn't sell particularly well at launch, its artistry inspired countless developers and cemented its place as a cult classic. We brushed against its story back in episode 164 when we talked about Shadow of the Colossus, which was Team Ico's other masterpiece. So that's worth checking out if you want to learn more about the broader picture.
Gaming as art.
Oh, yeah? Episode
Yeah.
2?
Well, that was episode 2, but we talked a lot about it in that. We talked a lot about it in that episode because Ueda and Team Ico are very artistically driven. They're very minimalistic, and their games are gorgeous and great. They're fantastic games.
Well, Dave, speaking of fantastic and great games, on September 22nd, 2011, From Software unleashed Dark Souls on the PlayStation 3 in Japan, issuing players a simple warning: prepare to die. A spiritual successor to Demon Souls, it dropped us into Lordran, a land where danger lurked around every corner, death was a constant teacher, and victory felt like conquering a mountain. Its interconnected level design, cryptic storytelling, and unforgiving difficulty reshaped modern action RPGs and spawned an entire subgenre of Souls-like games. At first, it seemed like a niche title, but its reputation grew, and today, Dark Souls is a cultural touchstone. For many players, saying "I beat Dark Souls" is less a brag and more a rite of passage.
I still can't say it.
No, I don't think you can, Dave. But with that being the last of today's games from history, I think you can say more about our topic.
I certainly can. Chris Roberts didn't just appear out of nowhere with Wing Commander, our topic today. He was already a programmer with big ideas before the 1990s. At just 17 years old, he released his first commercial title, Wizador, a whimsical side scroller for the BBC Micro, where players guided a wizard on a magical quest. Growing up in England, he tinkered with early computers, and so he's always been around them, right? And Wizador wasn't groundbreaking, but what it did do was prove that Chris Roberts could ship a professional game, in all honesty, before most kids his age had even picked a college major. He followed that up in 1986 with Striker's Run, developed alongside Philip Meller. It was published by Superior Software, and Striker's Run became one of the BBC Micro's most ambitious side-scrolling action games. In fact, it pushed the hardware of the BBC Micro so hard that certain features couldn't fit into the standard release. Eventually, they actually had to create an enhanced version of the game for a more powerful version of that computer called the BBC Master. And that version included extra graphics. There was like a proper title screen, finally, a high score table, user defined controls so you could, change your control scheme. And there was even music in the enhanced version. For many UK players, Striker's Run wasn't just a fun action game. It was proof that Roberts and the rest of his team, his collaborators, were able to push the BBC platform to its absolute limits, right? That game, for most people, was a technological marvel. That same year in 86, Roberts returned to the United States to visit his parents who had settled into Austin, Texas. And that move proved fateful because in 1987, he officially joined Origin Systems. And Origin Systems, which we've talked about before, was Richard Garriott's studio. And at the time, it was already gaining fame for Garriott's Ultima series, which that's the episode we covered Origin in. And it was here at Origin that Chris Roberts' ambition began to shift from simply making games to, I guess, reimagining what games could be. His first project there was Times of Lore, which was published in 1988. It was an action RPG that stripped away the endless menus and clunky interfaces of the era in favor of something more cinematic and accessible. Times of Lore dropped players into a large, seamless world without loading screens. Every review I found on Times of Lore bragged about how there was no loading. And that offered players free exploration and real time combat that felt closer to an adventure film than a spreadsheet, because when you're dealing with these other role playing games, that you have all these stat menus on the screen and you got to either type things or you have all these icons, that takes away from it a little. And Times of Lore was just drop you into the middle of a picture and away you go. It had a very clean interface. They mapped the commands to icons instead of text. And so this was more intuitive, more inviting for new players, while still allowing veterans the ability to find the, features that they commonly looked for. Times of Lore featured multiple quests, it featured branching paths, and in Times of Lore, we genuinely see the start of Chris Roberts' kind of what became an obsession with player choice. While Times of Lore was not a massive hit compared to Origin's Ultima, it was well received, and it does stand out as a polished and ambitious role playing game in its time. More importantly, though, it shows that Chris Roberts and Origin were possible. They were able to make a game that prioritized presentation, prioritized immersion, really emphasized player freedom. And these are all lessons that would kind of fuel Chris Roberts' leap from fantasy to interstellar dogfights. Now, Roberts had always been fascinated by the movies. He talks about loving Star Wars and Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica. He loved the action. He loved the special effects. He was a fan of the sweeping sense of adventure. And so when he joined Origin Systems in the late 80s, he really carried that love of cinema into his game ideas. While wrapping up his next game, that was a post apocalyptic RPG called Bad Blood, Roberts started to toy with the idea of a space combat game that wasn't so much of a stiff simulator like what was on the market, but rather felt like you were in a movie. And at the time, his employment at Origin was as a freelancer. He started out as a freelancer. As he was making Times of Lore and Bad Blood, he was a freelancer. And so he had to work on a prototype to sell the game, the idea, in his own time. These were long days, they were long nights, 14 hours at a time, he spoke of. And the truth of the matter was, up until this point, Chris Roberts had never done any 3D programming before. He was strictly a 2D and text based game designer. In his freelancing time, he did manage to hack together a system of bitmap scaling and rotation tricks that allowed him to mock up spaceships and place them into kind of a pseudo 3D space. But he wasn't skilled at it, and these early demos were incredibly slow. They were only playable on like really beefy 386 computers with math processors, which was rare at the time. But the truth of the matter is even though they were slow, they looked spectacular for their time. And so he managed to convince others with that prototype to start working on it. So he pulled in an artist from the studio named Dennis Lubé to mock up cockpits and ships and explosions. And he tapped a longtime programming partner in Paul Isaac to help continue to write some code. And together, these three guys got something flying. And as they worked through this process, the vision became clear for Chris Roberts. He wanted to make the world's first truly cinematic space combat game. Now, I will tell you something really cool. I'm a big fan of actually diving into the history. And Wing Commander has an incredible fan base. Like the people that were in their incredible fan base, and they saved documents. They got the documents from the team. They saved documents. There are websites you can actually look at the original pitch documents. The Universe Bible for Wing Commander is readily available online. I was able to dig through that old magazine. Like everything from this time period as it was made by the development team exists. So a lot of this information that we're getting isn't like secondhand. Like some of the stories that we're literally getting it from when it was written back in the late 80s, which is pretty cool. I always talk about how Diablo is one of my favorite episodes because we got to compare the original design document against what the game came. And that was really when I realized I liked doing this history as much as I did. And so this is kind of a throwback to that, to be honest with you.
Right on.
Roberts first pitched his cinematic space combat game as a project called Squadron. And Squadron came complete with a 40-page design document. And in it, it's a proposal that lays out everything. There is a backstory of humanity's war with another cat-like race called the Kilrathi. There is a ship, the carrier, called the Tiger's Claw that becomes your home base. There are branching campaigns where your victories and your losses shape the war. And it even suggests that you can develop rivalries with ace pilots from the Kilrathi race. A lot of really cool suggestions in this initial proposal, right? It talks about cockpits that sparked when damaged, pilots that react with gestures, dynamic music that shifts the tension of combat, and radio chatter from wingman and commanders that are displayed as portraits on cockpit monitors. I mean, that sounds cool by modern standards,
It does, yeah,
let
definitely.
alone like 1988, 89 when they're making this. Like that must have been mind-blowing to someone had to look at that and go, wow, you think you can pull this off?" you know?
Well, could they?
Well, could they? That's a great question. That is a great question. The proposal for Squadron wasn't just a design doc. It In the eyes of a lot of people, it's basically a movie script for a game. So with that in mind, it was pitched to the team, and by early 1990, Origin took it and they officially greenlit the project. So Warren Spector, who we talked about in our Deus Ex episode and other episodes, came on as producer, famous producer from that era. And his role was basically balancing Chris Roberts' grandiose, wild ambition with the reality of schedules and budgets, whatever good producer does, right?
Right.
They hired a writer and mission designer in Jeff George, and he took Chris Roberts' draft and he shaped it into a pretty straightforward story of good humans versus evil Kilrathi. Roberts had originally kind of toyed with moral shades of gray in his original draft, but Jeff George argued that players needed really clear stakes in the middle of a dogfight. And so the Kilrathi became, I guess, unapologetic villains, and humanity's fight for their survival became the stuff of space operas. Around Spector and Roberts, they continued to form a small team. Denise Lubay continued creating cockpits and the sets and the ships like he mocked up in the prototype. Glenn Johnson was brought on as a comics illustrator. He designed portraits for the pilots, complete with call signs, and then painstakingly worked through animating their mouth and eyes for those little portrait conversations. Stephen Beeman came on. He worked out the dogfight choreography, designing how enemy ships kind of swooped and zigzagged to look impressive when close. And Ken Demarest coded much of all this together. He made saving and loading in the barracks work. He programmed asteroid fields and radar dots and targeting reticles, and I mean even water dripping into a bucket in the barracks for atmosphere. I found a whole making of this game article that was at the back of a strategy guide for like literally the strategy guide, original official strategy guide for Wing Commander. The very back has an appendix, and there is a large making of section of it where they interviewed everyone. And they talked about that water dripping in a bucket as one of the little details that they put in, for atmosphere. Like those are the differences that make you feel like you're in a place. He can also systematize the dogfight AI into basically he designed 9 situational classes. Each ship and pilot had different reactions depending on those 9 situations, and that was how he laid out the AI to do dogfights in the game. And then, of course, we talked about the music being part of the pitch. Roberts insisted that the score was dynamic. It swelled and faded. It had to swell and fade like a film soundtrack, right? And so he brought on, we've talked about him before because his name is phenomenal, George the Fat Man Sanger, who delivered dozens of short orchestra style mini cues. Do you remember any other game that the Fat Man was on?
I can't say that I do, Dave. Not,
I
no,
I think the seventh guest was one of them.
didn't play
Um,
it.
and maybe Maniac Mansion. Let's see if I'm right.
Nope, not that one either.
Yep, the seventh guest, Wing Commander, Maniac Mansion, Tux Racer, and Zombies Ate My Neighbors.
Yeah, name a game that I've played, maybe.
Mm, Putt Putt Pep's Birthday Surprise.
Ah, yes, that's the one.
Putt
Definitely.
Putt
I know who
Putt
you're talking
Putt
about.
Putt Putt Saves the Zoo. Freddy
Oh, yeah.
Freddy
Well,
Freddy
putt.
Fish and the Case of the Missing Kelp Seeds. I mean, those are all good ones, right? Right?
I mean, they're
Right?
good, yes, but I just, that's all my friends were into them. I just couldn't get into them.
How about Scene It Music? Remember those Scene It interactive film games they used to make?
I think that was before my time, Dave.
All right. Well, I remember him from The Seventh Guest because he did The Seventh Guest, The 11th Hour sequel, and then they ended up making that fan project, The 13th Doll, and he did all of them. And The 13th Doll was his last game that he did a game on, which was like 6 years ago, or did soundtrack on. So they got their dynamic score, which I think we can all agree that music does wonders for both cinema and video games, right? And so they designed a game engine around that made the music kind of self-aware. It branched seamlessly depending on what was happening. If there was an enemy on your tail, if you took heavy damage and was critical, if you destroyed an enemy, all these were what it amounted to was that the soundtrack, the score for Wing Commander was truly one of the genuinely first dynamic scores in gaming. And it really gave Wing Commander that cinematic punch that Roberts was going for. In June of 1990, the project kind of hit its first big test, which was the Consumer Electronics Show, the Summer Consumer Electronics Show. Marketing at Origin wanted a demo to WoW distributors, but the game wasn't ready. And so Roberts and the team were kind of forced to crunch through 18 to 20-hour days, hacking together what they called a Wing Leader demo with a flight loop, cinematic shots, and flashy music. That demo ended up stunning the press. It showed that Origin, who was pretty much mostly known for Ultima, could suddenly compete with action blockbusters and other genres. There was one hiccup though. They released the game as Wing Leader. That's what they brought it to the show. Wing Leader wasn't just the name of the demo; it was literally the name of the game at that point. And though it cleared initial checks, like cursory checks, when they submitted it to the trademark office, they found that there was a conflict on the trademark for Wing Leader. So within a few months, by September, Wing Leader officially became Wing Commander. Now that final push, as most of them are, as we talk about week after week after week, were just brutal. The final months were just absolutely atrocious. Quality assurance logged hundreds of bugs a week. Playtesters were playing, hours upon hours, hammering the game for pacing and fun, but had to do it while they were testing every hardware combo, different sound cards, different joysticks, different disc formats, even different memory managers. This is the way gaming was back when. Um, Chris Roberts and his programmer Ken Demarest practically lived on the couches at Origin. They were fixing bugs all night, every night. And while doing so, they managed to sneak in some last minute flourishes to the game. They added a cinematic battle camera, and they were able to program an alternate ending to the game that happened when you were destroyed, where you're just kind of floating helplessly in space. And while they're doing that, the writers and the producer, Spector and Cantrell, they're kind of scrambling to finish documentation. They bring in a veteran game writer and Aaron Alston, who creates this in-universe manual that was styled as a magazine from the Tiger's Claw, while Cantrell was drafting the tutorial, and they managed to get it done at the last minute. Like the install guide, as the story goes, was literally finished at 9:30 p.m. one night, and then rushed to the airport to meet the printer deadline the next day. By the end of September, every piece of the package, the manuals, the blueprints, the labels, and the discs, they were all ready. And so after just 10 months of development, Wing Commander shipped on September 26, 1990. Origin marked that day with a tradition. They always hosted a ship day picnic for the team. So they held a picnic to celebrate that they were shipping another game. And at this specific ship day picnic, the president of Origin, Robert Garriott, announced that Chris Roberts was no longer a freelancer. He was now Origin's director of new technologies.
Ooh,
I know.
fancy.
And that was the end of Robert's freelance era and the beginning of Origin as a true powerhouse in this genre. And it was also the start of the Wing Commander series.
Woo!
You know, Rob, looking at how much crunch went into shipping Wing Commander, I can't help but think how lucky we are now. If Chris Roberts wanted to launch a podcast back then, he would have had to code the microphone driver himself.
Right? Meanwhile, we just log in, hit record, and let Zencaster do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. If you're thinking about starting a podcast or even just want to streamline your current setup, Zencaster is the all-in-one toolkit built for creators like us. Let's break it down.
First off, Zencaster lets you capture crystal clear audio and video right from your browser. No need for fancy hardware or software installs. Whether you're solo or remote with guests, it's smooth, reliable, and high quality.
It's basically the opposite of early 90s modem screech.
True that. And then there's the editing.
Zencaster includes built-in post-production tools that handle the cleanup for you. It removes background noise, balances volume levels, and even trims out all those awkward pauses and ums.
So, unless your guest is a literal Kilrathi, you're going to sound sharp. And even then, you probably will.
You probably will. And once you're ready to share your episode with the world, publishing is just as easy. Zencaster lets you distribute directly to all the major podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, without needing to juggle extra logins or feeds.
You know, it's like going from a floppy disk to hyperspace.
Yes. So if you've got a voice and a story to tell, there is nothing stopping you. Zencaster gives you all the tools in one place, from first word to final upload.
So head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use the code MemoryCardLane, all one word, to get 30% off your first month of any paid plan.
That's Zencastr. No E at the end because they edited it out for efficiency.
And with that, let's get back to Wing Commander, where the only thing more stressful than launch day was surviving the Kilrathi.
When Wing Commander finally hit store shelves in late September of 1990, it landed like a proton torpedo in the PC gaming world. Reviewers were stunned. Magazines praised its jaw-dropping graphics, its dynamic music, and the way it made players feel like they were starring in their own sci-fi blockbuster. One reviewer flat out said it was as much fun to watch as it is to play, and players echoed that sentiment on early online forums. More than a few admitted they got choked up when a beloved wingman didn't make it home.
Aww.
I know. Sales backed up the hype. Within its first year, Wing Commander sold over 100,000 copies, which is a staggering number for a PC game at the time, when even a few tens of thousands of copies could be considered a hit. By the time expansions and ports rolled out, sales would push towards 500,000, cementing it as one of Origin's most important titles. For a company best known for fantasy RPGs like Ultima, Wing Commander really proved that they could dominate new genres and appeal to entirely different audiences, right? The demand was so strong that Origin quickly capitalized with the Secret Missions, which was an add-on pack that was first bundled into a special edition and then released at retail. It sold through its initial 5,000 copy test run in weeks, eventually moving tens of thousands more and establishing a market for expansion discs. A second mission pack followed, and in 1991, Origin decided to push ahead with Wing Commander 2 Vengeance of the Kilrathi. Now, Wing Commander 2 really doubled down on its cinematic feel. It had fully voiced comms chatter, it had more elaborate cutscenes, and it really had established like deeper storytelling about betrayal and redemption in the aftermath of the Tiger Claw from the first game. It was another success, and it really genuinely proved that the first game hadn't been a one off. And so this really established Wing Commander as a franchise. And so it became a multimedia juggernaut, I guess. There are other games, there are spin offs, there are novels, there's a collectible card game,
Oh,
even like a Magic the Gathering type collectible card game. And we're not talking like, yes, there are novels, right? There are several novels that were released starting in 1992, I believe, and the last one would have been released in 2011. So there's like a dozen novels. They made it into a TV series in 1996 that aired on the USA Network. It didn't have any slouches in it. Mark Hamill was in it, for instance,
what?
right? 13 episode animated series. In 1999, they turned it into a movie that was literally directed. Chris Roberts directed it himself. And again, not a slouch. It had Freddie Prinze Jr. in it. It had Matthew Lillard in it, and a bunch of other people. It was not similar to the storyline from the video games. It diverged from the established like Wing Commander universe, and because of that, fans kind of shunned it. It ended up being like a critical and commercial failure as a result. So that should be a lesson in don't try to fix what ain't broke, right?
Yeah, you got that right.
Um, definitely, you definitely shouldn't. By the mid 90s, Wing Commander was easily one of the most recognizable names in PC gaming, and Chris Roberts had thus established himself as like the industry's go-to figure for cinematic ambition. If Wing Commander 2 proved the formula, Wing Commander 3 Heart of the Tiger redefined the ceiling. That was released in 1994. It was one of the most ambitious PC games ever made at the time. Robert's vision of an interactive movie went literal. The game shipped on 4 CD-ROMs. It featured hours of full motion video cutscenes with professional actors. Mark Hamill starred in this one. That's how he ended up in the TV series, because it's a continuation of this. John Rhys Davies is in it. Malcolm McDowell is in it. I mean, these are, John Rhys Davies is in Lord of the Rings. These are not nobody actors. These are significant Hollywood actors. For Wing Commander 3, Origin built elaborate sets and costumes. They kind of treated the production of Wing Commander 3 like a Hollywood shoot. And so the result was a game that felt as much like a film as it did a space simulator, with all these branching storylines that were carried out by recognizable stars. It was a gamble, no doubt, that paid off. Wing Commander 3 was an absolute critical and commercial success. It sold over 500,000 copies, and it was one of the games that people were finding themselves buying CD-ROM drives just to experience it alongside, we've talked about the big two, which are Mist and the Seventh Guest. This was one of the other ones people wanted to play. And so on its success, Roberts and Origin followed quickly with Wing Commander 4, The Price of Freedom in 1996. It had an even bigger budget, which is reportedly more than $10 million at the time. And shit, that's big by today's standards.
Yeah, I'd say so.
That script leaned very heavily into political intrigue and branching narratives. By the fourth game, the series wasn't just a game; it was more so a event. It was a universe, with the novels and the TV show and the upcoming movie. Like it was a cinematic universe that was hedged on a video game. It was blending Hollywood talent and PC horsepower in a way that no one else was attempting. Frankly, though, this ambitious came at a cost. Origin had been acquired by Electronic Arts in 1992, and by the mid 90s here, Roberts' desire for bigger budgets and longer timelines often clashed with EA's demands for predictable schedules and profitability. While the Wing Commander franchise was still successful, the rising costs of full motion video production and the shifting market at the time made the future of the series and its profitability uncertain. And so Chris Roberts, who was known for being restless and always wanted to up the bar, up the bar, up the bar, eventually left Origin, in the midst of all this clashing. He wanted to found his own studio, which was called Digital Anvil, which he did in 1996 after Wing Commander 4. And with Digital Anvil, Roberts continued chasing his dream of cinematic space adventures. That studio produced Starlancer in the year 2000 and began work on a game called Freelancer. Freelancer was a project that would echo many of the same ideas that he first laid out back in the Squadron design document, like an open universe and dynamic economies and branching narrative campaigns. But Freelancer was huge and it was ambitious and ended up having a very prolonged development cycle. And Chris Roberts' escalating ambition was taking its toll on the studio. They were running out of money, so they sought investors, ended up being acquired by Microsoft, and Microsoft got in there and kind of put their foot down about some things. So when Freelancer was finally finished in 2003, it was genuinely a compromise. It was not Robert's original vision. He had to give up some things to finish the game. I mean, but so many production teams do.
Oh, absolutely. We hear about it all the time. There's so much ambition they want to do, and they can't, whether it's because of cost or technology or something else.
After Freelancer, Roberts stepped away from game development for almost a decade. He turned his attention towards the film industry and did some things in the film industry for a little while. But the reality was that his passion for interactive cinema on the video game front, it never really faded. After he left Digital Anvil, and did his time in Hollywood, so to speak, he returned to video games in 2012 with what is still to this day, because it's an ongoing project, easily his most ambitious project. And that, my friends, is Star Citizen, which is a really controversial title.
Yeah.
Um, Star Citizen was announced through crowdfunding. The pitch he made in crowdfunding was incredibly clear. This would be the ultimate space simulator, one that combined the cinematic storytelling of Wing Commander with the open world scope that he once envisioned in Freelancer. And on paper, his promise was staggering. He wanted massive, persistent worlds. He wanted customizable ships and first person combat. He wanted to do trading and have exploration and have branching narratives. And these all would be running at a fidelity that would rival Hollywood blockbuster. He wanted to put players into a space, into a new universe. That's not an exaggeration. He wanted to put you into a universe. You could create a character and step into a universe and feel like you were actually there. And that pitch really resonated with a lot of people. It was, after all, Chris Roberts. Chris Roberts has a reputation making excellent space simulators. Regardless of how you feel about everything, he makes great games. Wing Commander was a very notable series for people that grew up in PC gaming in the 90s. And it was ambitious, and it was one of those games that you were excited for because it met those expectations, right? Like they talked big and they delivered mostly. I know Freelancer may have been a compromise, but the Wing Commander series, as it kept upping the ante, upping the ante, upping the ante, it met those expectations every time. It was one of those series that if that was your thing, which for those of you that don't know, space is my thing. It really did. It really did its thing. It really did its thing. As far as Star Citizen here, the initial Kickstarter campaign raised over $2 million, and it has remained a crowdfunding experiment. It has been crowdfunding now for 14 years. It does not have a studio beyond his studio. Doesn't have a publisher. Chris Roberts, RSI Industries is literally like Roberts Space Industries. It's literally like, you know, it's funding itself. And at this point, he has raised over $600 million to produce this game, making Star Citizen the most successful crowdfunded entertainment project in history. No doubt that money has come with scrutiny. A lot of people have invested in the game, and development is still ongoing, meaning that development on this vision has stretched on for over a decade. And not in the sense that it's a live service project. There are a lot of games that are still around for a decade. Rocket League, for instance, is 10 years. That's a live service that advertises itself as you're paying money for new skins and new this and new that. It's constantly changing. Star Citizen is kind of the same thing, but not advertised that way. It's not a live service in the same respect. So for all purposes, development on this final vision has stretched for over a decade now. The goals have shifted, there have been delays, and there is no obvious, clear final release date. So, to support Star Citizen, for many people, myself included now, it's kind of a dream in progress. It's a chance to actually experience Robert's vision of a living, breathing galaxy. But for critics, it's constantly viewed as an overextended project that really risks collapsing under the weight of its own ambition. For the record, I think Star Citizen is overly ambitious, but for what it's worth, it's fantastic. Like, I've played it, and the amount of detail they put in the game is amazing. It's definitely a love letter. It's definitely a love letter to the space combat, space simulator genre. In many ways, Star Citizen embodies everything about Chris Roberts' career. It's bold, it's cinematic, it's endlessly ambitious, it's pushing technology to its limits while chasing after an ideal that is just out of reach. Whether it ultimately delivers on that promise or its promises or not, it stands as proof that Roberts never really stopped believing in the power of video games to immerse us in the way that movies once did. And that's really the through line that's stretching from his career from Wing Commander here in 1990 to Star Citizen today. It's the idea that games can be more than just systems and scores. They can be stories that you live through with characters that you care about and battles that feel like cinematic blockbusters. Decades later, I guess, the spirit of Wing Commander is still very much alive, but now it's not part of the Wing Commander series. Instead, it is written into every ambitious promise of Star Citizen. If today's interstellar dogfights left you wanting more, don't forget that we've also talked about other space simulators, such as in episode 108 when we talked about Elite. We revisited Atari's classic Star Raiders in episode 185. You can, of course, find those episodes and plenty more of other topics waiting for you at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people find on our website?
Well, Dave, you can find a calendar of our future episode topics. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come hang out with Dave and I and tell us when we forget certain things in our episodes, or maybe just post the wrong audio altogether. You never know. You can find links to our Patreon, where you can help support us and get access to ad-free and unedited versions of our episodes. And you can find links to our social media, where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a console, a technology, a person. We've done episodes on places before that are relevant to video games. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. When we sit down to outline new topics each week, we get excited when we always find new things, we learn new things, and it's very exciting to be able to then turn around and bring them to you each week. It's this fantastic cycle of teaching and learning, learning and teaching, and in celebration of said cycle, we always go roundtable and talk about our takeaways. So, Rob,
No, Dave, what did you learn today?
what did I learn today? What did I learn today?
Yes, Dave, what did you learn today?
I learned that. What did I learn today? Most of this was brand new to me. I really enjoyed the fact the crunch period. You can literally go in there and read like the bugs that they found. And I mean, there's weird ones like you can't put this joystick with this sound card type stuff. And it's just funny to me to be able to get to sit down and look at that stuff and realize how far gaming has come because at this era gaming was so scattered, right? It really wasn't until Windows 95 came out and DirectX came out that we had this like simplified platform that everyone could play on. Before that, it was the really wild west, and when you get to step back and look at things like this, it's really a reminder of how far it's come, and that was kind of a fun thing to revisit personally. So how about you?
Well, I think for me, it's that there was the 40-page document for the game. I always think it's cool when there's a ton of thought that goes into it, and it's not kind of just, hey, let's hobble some ideas together and see what happens. But there's someone who clearly had a vision, who had this idea in mind and wanted to see it come to life and did what they could to make it happen. Now, obviously, we should be able to tell based on it still being available that there how much of that 40-page design document came to be. But it's still it's kind of cool to think about that there was such a large degree, and even if not all of it did come to be, even still, just having that mentality in mind and being able to improve upon it as time went, and sometimes those took those 18 to 20-hour nights and days, but they were able to do it, and it's awesome to hear to bring an idea and imagination, something that's in your mind, and make it real.
Well, I
I say
think
it all
that
the time.
I think to piggyback on that too, it was also really fascinating to see the original Squadron document and to kind of know Star Citizen and see how much of that still exists in Chris Roberts' modern design philosophy, right? Like Star Citizen is like the culmination of all of this that he's learned. Like this is the story of how he this is very much the story of Star Citizen because it's the story of how he got the Star Citizen, right? Even though it wasn't a topic today, you can look at it that way. It was really fascinating to see that vision in the beginning and have an idea on what that vision is now and to kind of see how we got from point A to point B. I thought that was really fascinating too. Rob, before I take it out of here and look at next week, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
I will take a quick moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world to have you along as we fly through space. So thank you.
Chris Roberts set out to make a game that felt like a movie, and in Wing Commander, he proved that it could be done. In just 10 months, he and an overworked team at Origin Systems created a space combat simulator that looked and sounded like nothing else in the market. It pulled players into a galactic war, not just with dogfights, but with characters, story, and emotion. An experience that left many saying it was as fun to watch as it was to play. Now, the success of Wing Commander launched a franchise. It redefined what PC games could aspire to. It turned Roberts into one of the most ambitious directors in gaming. That ambition would carry him through the full motion video era of the 90s, into new studios and projects, and eventually find his way to Star Citizen, which is a crowd-funded behemoth that still echoes with that same dream to immerse players in a cinematic universe that feels alive. And so while the hardware has changed and the budgets have ballooned, the heart of Robert's vision remains the same. The spirit of Wing Commander, as I said, still lives on in every promise of Star Citizen. A reminder that for Roberts, games were never just about points or polygons, but about putting you in control of your own epic space adventure. Next week, we're docking our starships from Wing Commander and descending into the dark labyrinth world of The Binding of Isaac. Released in 2011, this groundbreaking indie title combined roguelike mechanics with a deeply unsettling narrative inspired by biblical themes, creating an experience that was as haunting as it is addictive. From its procedurally generated dungeons to its profound exploration of trauma and guilt, The Binding of Isaac left a very unique mark on the indie gaming scene. Join us as we uncover its origins, gameplay, and legacy on next week's thought provoking trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Dooba doom 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 bop bop.